tonight's council meeting. There are agenda items which have been circulated, agenda booklets on the seats here, so I encourage you to use those so you can follow tonight's meeting. There will be a slight change during the early part of proceedings to item 4. Having said that, we'll just wait for Councillor Walsh to join us in a few moments. But it has approached the commencement now, so we'll commence tonight's meeting with the membership is as listed. Item 2, there are no apologies. However, Councillor Walsh is here this evening and he will be joining us shortly. Item 3, disclosure of conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest from people?
No, particularly.
No, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillors. And just for the benefit of the members of the gallery, there is no direct dialogue with councillors during tonight's meeting. There will be questions answered by me. Those have been submitted online. And I will explain that, in relation to question time, we do intend to write to the department and request some feedback and probably reinstatement of questions from the gallery, but that's a few weeks away once we complete this trial period. Council have been informed about that in the past, but we're working through that. Okay, item 4, confirmation of minutes of the previous council meetings. We have someone move that. Move Councillor Williams, second Councillor Greco. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item is carried. We now go to Councillor Walsh.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Just a quick a statement on indulgence.
So are you moving to suspend
yes,
standing
I'm
orders or
moving
not?
to suspend standing orders.
Do we have a seconder?
I'm happy to second that.
Second Councillor Greco. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Okay. Can I just make a comment now, Council, in relation to suspension of standing orders? Anything that's discussed or spoken to here will not be recorded, will not be noted in the minutes. So there'll be no record of it in any shape or form. So we need to be made aware of that. Okay. Apart from what's being noted or observed on screen, this will not be recorded in the minutes. So reference down the track may be hard to find in relation to this matter. Okay. Having said that, I think that's been explained. Councillor Walsh.
Yep, would be happy to. On this, I'll be happy to provide an email to councillors with my statement. As you are aware, last Tuesday night, a comment referring to the Minister of Local Government was posted on my Facebook page. I categorically and unequivocally apologise to the Minister, to you, my fellow councillors, council staff, and to anyone else in the community who may be offended with what I said. These comments were out of character and don't reflect my personal values. These comments were deleted almost immediately. I concede that I showed poor judgment in posting these comments. The fact that I was frustrated about a political decision that I saw as unjust is no excuse for these comments. I have taken decisive action to repair any damage caused by my mistake. It's been a tough week. The action that I've taken is that I've written a letter of apology to the Minister. I've contacted the Minister's office seeking to apologise to her in person. As councillors are aware, I wrote to councillors after the incident. Thank you very much. Councillors know that I normally play the issue, not the person, and I'm very disappointed that I let my frustration and get the better of me and playing the person in such a unbecoming way, I guess. So I apologise for that, but I'll leave it there, and I'd like to move on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walsh. We need a resumption of standing orders now.
Happy to move.
Move Councillor Walsh, second Councillor Williams. All those in favour to resume standing orders? Carried. So just reiterating what I said before, the only recording of Councillor Walsh's letter will be what's been noted on video. This will not be included in the minutes. Okay. We now go on
Just a
Councillor
Just a
Lee.
procedure question. If we are to minute that particular piece of policy, assuming Councillor Walsh is agreeing to that, what would be the right procedure for that?
That'll be a separate motion where councillors will actually need to lodge.
Yes. Through you, Mr Mayor, it would require a motion by a councillor. It would also require Councillor Walsh to reread his statement. Anything that's discussed or said in suspension of standing orders, we can't minute in the minutes. Sure.
As a matter of to assist, if this would assist Councillor Lee, as I said, in order to move, in order to get on with the substantive and important business of tonight's agenda, I'm happy to email all councillors a copy of what I've said, and I've pretty much read it word for word. So
I think the question asked by Councillor Lee was
Yeah.
Correct procedure.
Yes.
to have it included in the minutes.
Yes. Yes. So
We
can we
require a
do it as
motion.
an urgent motion tonight, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Or as an urgent motion, please.
I understand something similar will be called for this evening, Councillor
Thank you,
Lee.
Mr. Mayor.
Okay, if there's no more comments, we'll continue on with tonight's agenda. Going to item 5, public question time. We've had a couple of questions lodged online. I thank the members of the public who have lodged those. First one is from Serena O'Mealy from Reservoir. Several questions. First one is, will Darwin Council allow members of the public, when they are present in the public gallery, to read out their own questions from the next meeting? 2, if not, will Darwin Council please release any correspondence between Council and the Minister for Local Government's Office which mandates that the decision to return question time to its old format must wait until a formal review of governance changes? 3, rather than simply listing the topic of questions and the name of the council who answers in the minutes, will Darwin Council follow the lead of nearby local governments like Mornell and Yarra that put the full questions and answers in the minutes? Good question. Will Darwin Council, where possible, respond to public question time on the night of the council meeting, which has been the previous practice? I'll provide a response now and a written response to Serena. The response is, at this stage, the change to public question time has only been in operation for 4 council meetings and requires a period of time for the process to be smoothed out. In the coming weeks, Council will commence a review of the recent change to public question time to see how it's working. As part of the review, officers will again look at how councils deal with their public question time and how it may differ to Darwin. Councils and executive management team are in agreement to the change, the way in which the public question time was held. Those changes are reflected in the final report submitted by the municipal inspectors presented to the Minister for Local Government. A copy of that final report presented to the Minister for Local Government will be sent to you for information. Where a public question has been submitted in advance of the council meeting, a response will be given on the night. Depending on the question and time it was lodged, Council endeavours to provide a detailed response. However, it's not always possible if questions are submitted close to 7 p.m. So that's a part explanation. We're currently, as I mentioned before, not in a review, but I classify it as a review process to abide by the reforms which were suggested by the monitors to the Minister, and subsequently we're in the process of having a look at and assessing how this is being done. So in a few weeks we should hopefully have an answer from the Minister to say yes, we're happy for you to reinstate question time from the gallery. And I should add that being part of the council in Council 98, we've always had questions from the gallery, and we're one of the first councils to undertake that process, and I'm hoping that it'll be reinstated too in a not too distant future. We have one more question.
Mr Mayor, before you continue, I just, and I did speak to you before this, I would just like to note my objection to the interpretation of that notion of the rules around public question time, if I can have that noted in the minutes, and because I have expressed that view that people should be able to read their questions even if they have submitted them by 7 p.m. So
wholeheartedly agree with you,
I'm
Councillor McCarthy.
Make an issue of it now, but obviously you've conveyed a way forward, which I'm happy to
and that was also conveyed in an email to Council last week. We've just got to be a bit patient and just work through the processes and give it a go, and then say, okay, we want to go back to the good old days.
So if I can have that just noted in the minutes, that objection.
Happy for you to note it.
Mr Mayor, if I may, also in the past, as you know, I've also expressed the interpretation.
Noted, Councillor Greco.
Given that Councillor McCarthy's right, I would also like to be noted in the same way.
And I think other councils have as well.
Yeah, I think there's other councils.
If that's necessary. Okay, thank you for that.
And
Another question?
Councillor Villala, please, Mr Mayor, noted.
Yes, Councillor Villala. Anyone else?
No, don't worry, move on.
Thank you. Next question is from Kim Reserve. Question to Council is, given Council's comments last week about the Minister for Local Government and Aboriginal Affairs, Minister Natalie Hutchins, if he is not prepared to do the honourable thing and step down as Deputy Mayor, will Council strip him of his privileged leadership role? Look, at this stage, the only response I can provide is that the concerns raised will be subject to a confidential discussion by Councils later this evening, and the resolution from Council will be made available to the public.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, who sent that?
That was from Kim Lesurf, if that's pronounced correctly,
Okay,
from
thank you.
Thornbury.
Yep.
They're all the questions which have been lodged this evening, and I thank those members of the community who have lodged those. We'll provide written responses as we've read them out in public here this evening as well.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, before we move on to our normal business, if I may move that one of the confidential items, 15.2, be considered as an open item of council and be listed as item 6.13 on the council agenda.
Councillor Grech, I just need to remind you that the reason why it's been listed as a confidential has to do with staffing matters and possible financial, I suppose, issues. So I think we need to be very mindful of that.
Yeah, I understand that, and,
Right.
but I think, Mr. Mayor, I want to move in that direction, that it be heard as an open item. If I have a seconder, I'll be able to provide some other
Before you receive a second, just a point of order, Mr. Mayor. Whether anything in our local governance law actually allows you the ability to strike out such a proposition on the basis of the confidential aspects relating to finance. And also
We'll look at that right now. I was only notified at the commencement of the meeting that this was going to be considered. I would have liked some notice in advance, and so would the staff, so we could provide much more detailed answers to Councillor Greco's issues. We have actually mentioned that in the briefing we've just had prior to commencement of this meeting. So, in relation to Councillor Cetus's question, Ms. Stevens, do you have any response?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if council resolves to move a confidential item into the open agenda, they can do so by resolution. Otherwise, it will remain in the confidential section.
So we've had the mover. Do we have a second?
Can I just, I'm willing to second it. Just a procedural question then. If council was to move 15.2 into the open part of the meeting, would council still then be able to move into camera in relation to that item on any matters that are of a sensitive nature?
We won't know until it's discussed.
On the basis
Too
of,
late.
unless there's a...
Well, it could be quite difficult, I would imagine.
Ms. Stevens?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would assume, looking at the report, that the majority of the report contains confidential information, so it would be hard to separate what was confidential and what would be held out in the open. So council would be resolving to bring the whole report and its contents out into the open. Or leave it in.
Or leave it in camera. I'm interested to hear Councillor Greco's view on this, so I'm happy to second for the purpose of the procedural.
Okay, let's hear the argument and we'll
Thank
go to a
you,
vote.
Councillor McCarthy, for allowing me to seconding the motion. Look, I think that item 15.2 is a very important item. It's been listed as a confidential item, but in my viewing of that item, I just believe that the public interest in relation to that particular item is of such paramount importance that it deserves to be listed as an open item and debated as an open item. Just last week we had some legal advice provided to councillors about confidential items. Whilst things can be listed as confidential items, the council has discretion over, notwithstanding what the nature of the items are, whether it's for a legal matter or for contractual matters or for personnel matters, that the council can still list the item as an open item for open debate. And again, I think that the community would have the right to know about what council's rationale is in relation to that particular agenda item. And obviously, I can't go into it right now because we're in the open, so I'll keep my comments very broad. I think we need to be open and transparent in decisions that we make, and I believe that the decision in relation to that particular item is a very, very important decision for council, and again, I think that the public interest in this particular situation is of such importance that the matter would need to be made open. The other point that also needs to be aware is that the community is already aware of NDIS. The community has an expectation that the council will be considering this particular item, and also if you look at our agenda, the open agenda, it also notes there that the decision that the council will be making tonight will be made available to the public. So if the decision is made available to the public, I think it's incumbent on us to provide the rationale behind the decision, that is also made available to the public. Again, I can't stress the importance of the decision we're going to be making tonight, and I think that the public interest is paramount. And I end up on this final note, is that with the new legislation that now says that that confidential items, the old legislation said up to the confidential items could remain confidential up to 50 days and then after 50 days become open. Now with the new legislation, that could be locked in as confidential items forever and a day. So the community then would be denied to see what was the rationale of the council in arriving at its decision in relation to this very important NDIS matter.
Thank you. There's a seconder wish to add anything to it?
Nothing to add.
I'd like to speak in opposition, I think.
Okay, yeah. Councillor Walsh, you want to speak against it?
Look, I think because I'm going to take up speaking because I sit here listening to Councillor Goho, and Councillor Goho, you make some very valid points, which the principle of I wouldn't disagree with, and I do think it is I can see the argument of it being in the public interest. However, I feel for me this is difficult because I think to some extent our hands might be tied, given the advice that we have from officers regarding some of the perhaps some of the matters that are proclaimed to in the report. I feel that our perhaps a better option is that we I'm just thinking out loud here, that we perhaps move that the resolution be public, but the report remain confidential. That might be the better. That would be the better outcome. And for me, that's something I would look at foreshadowing in the confidential discussion, Mr. Mayor. If you're following my logic there.
That's the resolution. That's the recommendation.
Okay, I'm corrected. You obviously read my mind then.
Councillor Lawrence.
Just a quick question, Mr. Mayor. When we hear this item...
Can you stand up, please, Councillor?
Yes, so when we hear this item in confidential matters, if you could just clarify, at that point, Council, obviously, if they follow recommendation, will make the decision public, but can Council actually make parts of the report public and consider that point too?
We can consider anything, Councillor Lawrence, but what I will read out is a section of the Act which actually explains the reason why it's in camera. Section 89 of the Act, point 2, a council or special committee may resolve that the meeting be closed to members of the public if the meeting is discussing any of the following. It goes to a couple, and I go to point C, industrial matters, D, contractual matters, and E, proposed developments. All these three cover the other. Proposed developments. So that's the actual section of the Act which I've quoted. We can also include personal matters, which is A.
Personnel.
Mr. Mayor,
And point B2, the personal hardship of any resident or ratepayer.
Can I add something else?
You may expand.
We have also included number of emails and other type of information provided by various entities on this. There might be some privacy issues as well. As Councillor Lawrence said parts of it can be made public if the council can nominate each person, as long as they do not in conflict with one of the requirements of the Act.
Okay, is that pretty clear, guys?
Yeah, just to reply very quickly, Mr. Mayor, unless there's other speakers.
Any other speakers to it?
Just very quickly, again, I'd like to just to reiterate that I think we have to be as open, as transparent as we possibly can. I think there's already been community consultation and debate around this particular issue, and so that the community deserves to know what the rationale of council is in arriving at its decision, and the rationale is there in the report, which I think should be made public. And just on the final point that has been raised about what the legislation says, the key operative word in the legislation is that council may. So council has the discretion. And again, this backs up the legal advice that we received just last week, that notwithstanding those conditions, whether it's contractual matters or legal matters that may be in a report, council can still, because of the public interest issue, still make reports publicly available. And I think that this is one of the cases where that report should be made publicly available, because the decision is going to be made publicly available, or it's proposed to be made publicly available. So it follows that the report that has the rationale behind that recommendation should also be made publicly available.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I'll now put that to a vote. All those in favour of removing the matter from camera out to public, please raise your hands. Those against? The motion is lost. That remains in camera. You may call for a division. All those in favour of Councillor Greco's recommendation to bring the matter out of camera, please stand. I name Councillor Lower, Councillor Greco, Councillor McCarthy. All those against, please stand. I name Councillor Lee, Williams, Cetus, Fontana, Lawrence and Walsh. Thank you. We'll now go on to item 6, consideration of reports. The first item of consideration is proposed road discontinuance, rear of 33 to 37 Cooper Street and 34 to 38 Asling Street. Move Councillor Williams, second Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams.
This is just a straightforward statutory procedure under the section 206 and clause 3 of Schedule 10 of the Local Government Act. It's just pardon me, to the discontinued road adjoining 33 to 37 Cooper Street and 34 to 38 Ainslie Street in Preston. All it does is, as you've noticed, under section 207A and 82 of the Act. And it's just to go to appropriate newspapers and council website that we will be discontinuing that right of way.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Lawrence, anything to add?
Nothing to add, Mr Mayor. Councillor Williams has covered that completely.
Okay, if there's no further debate, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item is carried. Item 6.2, proposed road discontinuance adjoining 2 Greenock Street and 8 to 10 Ban Street Reservoir.
Move it, Mr Mayor.
Recommendation moved by Councillor Villala, seconded Councillor Lawrence. Yeah. Councillor Villala.
Yes, this is very similar to 6.1. I do note, Mr Mayor, because I'm always concerned about these particular items, as to how the parties who are interested in the particular road, especially when you have one resident who has been using that particular site for a while. My understanding and the advice from the officers is that the two parties have come to an understanding in relation to this, so it seems to me that it's kind of an amicable arrangement, and so therefore I'm confident that it will not be causing any undue stress to either parties. So for that reason, Mr Mayor, I'm happy to move it.
Thank you, Councillor Villala. Councillor Lawrence, anything to add?
No, Mr Mayor, I just would note that it has been a case where a mutual agreement's been able to be reached, and we're not pitting neighbour against neighbour. But I would note with this item and some other items, there probably needs to be extra effort by the council to communicate with people from various backgrounds in our community, because these issues can be very complicated.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. These are good outcomes. It's not often we get mutual parties agreeing. There's no further debate. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Next item is 6.3, outcome of statutory process to enter into lease agreements with Early Childhood Management Services Incorporated. Councillor Williams has moved, Councillor Greco has seconded. Councillor Williams.
We've had no submissions that's been received, so we're just going to enter a lease agreement with the Early Childhood Management Services at each of the early facility centres, which are at the Oak Hill Family Centre, which is located at North Road, the Darebin North East Community Hub, located at 35 Cooper, how do you say that?
Copernicus Drive.
And Keon Park Hub, which is located at Dole Avenue Reservoir.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco.
I just want to say that, just want to note the fabulous work that these centres do for the city of Darebin and for all the residents that actually use the centres.
Thank you very much. There's no further comment or debate. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Next item is our 6.4 Amendment GC42, Environmentally Sustainable Development, Local Planning Policy.
I'd like to move that, Mr Mayor, but I would just like to advise councillors of just an additional point 6 to the motion, very brief, which would read, include a feature item in the Darebin Community News and a regular feature on Council's website regarding this.
Okay. Seconded, Councillor Lee. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Lee. I'm really pleased that this has come back to us and that we're moving ahead with the proposed ESD controls, which would bring, and when I say ESD, it's environmentally sensitive design controls, which would bring council in line with other councils who have already moved in this direction and have sought and achieved approval from the Planning Minister to bring much stronger controls around the sustainability, particularly of medium density dwellings. And in our case in the city of Darebin, this has been a major bugbear for some time, wanting to impose important conditions that improve the livability of apartments and dwellings and the sustainability of those apartments and dwellings and houses as well. But we know now the mix is that we are seeing more multi-unit apartments and dwellings in Darebin than we are single houses, so we need to focus on achieving the best outcomes for current and future residents. What we have here is a planning scheme amendment, and the proposal here is to move this amendment from the phase that it has been in, which is the developmental phase and the initial engagement phase, into a phase where we formally, I should say we also have exhibited it to formally submitting it to the Minister so that the Minister will appoint an independent panel. This is an integral part of the process. It is required as per the Planning and Environment Act for it to undergo this statutory process, and hopefully, assuming that we see a positive endorsement from the panel, the Minister will sign it off and support the proposed amendments that we've made and that we put forward. I just would like to draw Council's attention to some of the elements in this new policy. They cover everything from energy performance of buildings, water resources, indoor environmental qualities, stormwater management, transport, waste management, and something which we hold very dear here in the city of Darebin, which is our urban ecology. And of course, we want to see the retention wherever we can of natural spaces in our streets, in our parks, and of course in the urban environment as well. The process, and this is very much a procedural motion, but it takes us forward from the work that's already been done and the strong support that this has received in both the professional planning community and also in our own community as well. This takes us forward to that stage where we can finally get those ESD controls that I think the community both demands and expects from a city like Darebin, which has actually been a really strong environmental ambassador on a whole range of fronts. So I'm really hopeful that, given the work that's already gone into this through groups like CASB, which is the key network of environmental planning officers, and of course councils, partner councils as well in relation to this process, that we'll actually see an outcome very soon and hopefully within the life of this term. I think it would be a great thing for us to end this term with, is actually to get those ESD controls in place before we finish here in October.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lee, anything to add?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I begin by thanking our officers who've done a lot of hard work, and also to our residents who actually contributed to the GC42 planning scheme amendment. We now move to a stage, as Councillor McCarthy said, where we can actually formally request the Minister to appoint an independent panel so that we can actually move on to the formal adoption of the process, which in the bureaucratic language means it's being seriously entertained. What that means to the residents of Darebin is that once we do adopt that into our planning scheme, that we are able to introduce ESD design principles into our high-density design buildings, which we are seeing increasing number of here in the city of Darebin. Not only do we looking at best practice in some of our commercial development, and I know that when we do things, urban renewal projects such as the Northland Urban Renewal Program, we incorporate things such as urban sensitive water retention and usage. We're now actually introducing that into high-density development, and I think that is where Darebin is once again at the leading edge of planning reform. And again, I thank the officers, and I look forward to the Minister appointing the independent panel to move this to the next stage of the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lee. Any further comments? Councillor Walsh.
Very quickly, Mr. Mayor, and for maximum transparency, not an interest, but no conflict, but an interest that mentions the Bass Coast Shire Planning Department. My cousin is a manager at Bass Coast Shire Planning Department, so just noting that for transparency. But could I just say I would like to note and acknowledge Councillor McCarthy's amendment, because I think it is quite important to have a piece about it in the Darebin Community News, because I think in this process we have to get on and always be explaining the process to the community, and hopefully in language that that they get and that rings true to the community. So just on that regard, all go to Councillor McCarthy on picking up that, because it's something I didn't pick up and I wish that I did.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. If there's no further comment, I'll put that to a vote. Before I do, I'd like to thank those people who lodged those positive submissions. More importantly, Councillor McCarthy's additional point to inform the committee of these changes, very important changes too. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Next item is 6.5, the Fairfield Village Action Plan. We have a mover, Councillor McCarthy, seconded Councillor Walsh. Councillor McCarthy.
I'll keep it moving along, Mr Mayor. As councillors would have read, there's been the development of an action plan for Fairfield. It's had strong buy-in and involvement from traders and residents as well, and it really looks at the Fairfield Village area as an activity centre which has enormous potential for both the thriving shopping centre that it is and a local shopping strip, but also a place of community and a place where people not only feel safe and feel socially included, but also from the traders' perspective feel like they have the conditions for support that from council in terms of having successful businesses that are connected to the local community. So one of the things that I really like about this is that it reaffirms the local nature of the Fairfield Village, and it is a village, it is not a major activity strip, and it certainly talks about that emphasis of maintaining that village feel. But of course there are some threats and opportunities that Fairfield faces, one of which is the Amcor development at the Alphington Paper Mill, the development at the old Amcor site, the paper mill, which could present some enormous opportunities for Fairfield in terms of those businesses, but also could threaten potentially the base there as well. And so part of the challenge here is to work out how we best respond to support our local businesses and our local community with that change that's taking place just down the road. Of course, also what's happening in terms of transport and traffic movements in Station Street, Fairfield as well, how we make sure that we maintain a strong pedestrian feel, we maintain that sense that this is a 40k zone, a place where people can walk and cross easily around the street, and that it doesn't become a through route. And of course, Council has done a lot of work over many years, and I think back in 2008 it might have been when we finally got the 40k zone in place here in Station Street. And of course that's really transformed the pedestrian feel of the area. As councillors would see on pages 29 and of course also 30 as well, there are some specific proposals there, really simple things which make a difference to the well-being and viability of the strip. One of which I think we have talked about in our bigger policies is introducing water-sensitive urban design into Fairfield, into Station Street there, and that really helps mitigate some of the potential flood impacts. And we've had a number of flood experiences in Fairfield in recent decades, and I suspect we'll have more with the unpredictable weather and climate that we now live in. I'd just like to finally thank all the traders and the residents and other stakeholders who've contributed to this process, and I think also in the development of a master plan and an action plan. Not everyone gets everything they want, but the key thing here is that people have been involved in the conversation, and what we have is a strong consensus outcome in terms of what we want to see Fairfield continue to be, which is a strong village feel that supports our local traders and local residents.
Right on time, Councillor McCarthy. Thank you. Councillor Walsh.
Look, I'm not going to say too much more. I think in the interest of time, and Councillor McCarthy's covered most of it. But I think there are a number of things which are, which are happening and being activated on Station Street. Something that's not quite covered in the report, but something that we are looking at from a couple of council meetings ago, part of work that I did last year is possibility of safety bollards on, additional safety bollards on Station Street, and I look forward to the outcome of those discussions, given the events of last year on Station Street. But I'll leave it there, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Any further comments from councillors? If there's not, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Next item
is unanimous, please, Mr.
Yes, we'll note that as unanimous by the minute takers. Next item is 6.6, the East President Community Centre operational governance structure. Very quick there, Councillor Williams. With a seconder?
Yes, I.
Councillor Lee. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Darebin Council has established an infrastructure fund and has made an actual commitment to consult with the community to determine how this fund would actually be utilised. Following this process, it was recommended by the citizen jury to council that $865,000 should be allocated towards the establishment of the East Preston Neighbourhood House. Now, looking at the council plan, goal and endorsed strategy under the Healthy and Connected Community for the 2013-2017 Health and Wellbeing Plan, it was recommended that that we endorse the operations of East Preston Community Centre, and 2, seek funding in line with that provide with other neighbourhood houses. 3, to further report in 12 months' time to the evaluation of the centre to determine the ongoing operation model. And 4, endorses the establishment of the Community Reference Group for the East Preston Community Centre.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Lee, anything to add?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Councillor Williams said, the East Preston Community Centre is the jewel in the crown of the citizens' jury that we held, and $865,000 was allocated to the construction operation of the centre. Councillors were given a confidential report on that, on the construction and build of the centre, and we have all seen the plans of it, and I think it will be a stunning centre once it's up and running. What this report does is goes into the operational governance aspect of the centre. We essentially have 3 options. The council can operate the centre, or we can let the community run it, or we go through a transition model, which is what we're voting on for tonight. Under this transitional centre, under this transitional model, this council will assist in the initial 12-month operation of the community centre or neighbourhood house, with a view to transition it to a co-tenant model whereby the community runs it, with the assistance and input of the community reference group. And I think that's the most sensible way forward, given that this is a new site. However, we're also blessed with that we do have a network of neighbourhood houses in Darebin, and many of them would have significant experience under the belt into running a co-tenant model. And it is my hope, and I firmly believe that the residents of East Preston would actually be willing to engage with the council and actually bring that timeline forward. Hopefully, we're not going to need that 12-month transition period. We might even see it sooner. And that is my belief in the residents of East Preston, and I hope to see that happen. And if it does, I'm glad to receive a report earlier than the 12-month period.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Delano.
Mr Mayor, thank you. I do wish to speak to this because I think it's really impressive. I understand that the need for a community centre in East Preston has been known, for a while. And discussed, and there was a deficiency there in providing that kind of a service, and I suppose that the citizens' jury picked up on that through their consultation, and that was very pleasing because it did look at where is the greatest need, I think, for public monies in Darebin. So, but in addition to that, Mr Mayor, I think the process from then, in terms of the work that the officers have put in to really progress this project in a relatively short period of time. So now we're pretty much nearly up and running. And that's fantastic. And also, Mr Mayor, I want to commend on the choice of site. Because in the report, and this has come to us in the past, there were various sites, but it was recommended and it was approved here at Council that the site be 7 Newton Street, which is a DHS site and currently is tenanted by the East Preston Tenants Association. And it was identified that it would be really good to have that particular organisation in with the other services provided, because you already have that engagement for the cohort of residents who might need that support. So I think, Mr Mayor, from go to woe, it has been a really impressive process, and I think long overdue, but I think now that we've done it really well. I think the transitional stage makes absolute sense, where Council can build on the networks and the links it already has with the community, and I'm sure the officers will work very closely with the well-organised community that's already there at the grassroots level to maybe make it quicker than the 12 months period for the transition to occur. I'm really proud of this. I want to congratulate the officers and also note the work that the citizens' jury's done, and I think it will add a lot of value to the lives of the residents in that area. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. There's no Councillor Greco.
Just very quickly, Mr Mayor, I'd like to add a further amendment, if the mover and the seconder will agree to it, is that a fifth point that we write to the citizens' jury members, updating them on these recent developments.
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem.
Good idea.
Okay, and if I could just add a few words, Mr Mayor. Why I put that point on is that Councillor Valella, I think, is on the money. This has been a really fabulous process right from the outset. It's been quick, and it's also been very democratic and very consultative. It's very hard usually to get those two things together, because when you try to be consultative, it usually drags out in time, or when you try to be too quick, you actually have to cut people out in having a say. Here we've been able to achieve both things because of the model that we adopted, both with the citizens' jury under the participatory budgeting approach, and then following through. So I'd like to commend again the officers in moving this forward, and a special thanks also I think we need to pay to the citizens' jury, so that they can see that their work is actually coming to fruition in a very, very quick and orderly manner.
So who will write the letter, Councillor Greco?
Right?
Who will write the letter?
Mayor to write the letter.
Oh. Thank you, Councillor Greco. If there's no further debate or comment, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Carried. Job well done then. Okay, next item is 6.7, the electronic gaming machines and Council's planning scheme. Second, Councillor Lee. Second, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, staff. I wish to record my appreciation for the staff for their hard work and dedication on this. I know it has been a long gestation, and I thank you for your patience. This came about due to the deferral from the last one, where we actually start looking at not supporting new pokies application on old council-owned land, and also refusing application for expansion of pokies on council-held land. And I'm glad to hear that our officers come back reaffirming those two issues. While the third point was asked in terms of incorporating that into the planning scheme, I think the report made it abundantly clear that there are significant costs involved associated in the order of $100,000. And while that money is considerable, it also needs to be balanced against the number of applications that we receive. Since the term of this council, we've only received one, and that's the Grandview Hotel. And that has unsurprisingly been approved by the Liquor Gambling Regulation Commission after our refusal. So what we need to do is look at a modern and contemporary pokies policy that supports reflective of Darebin community's views, but also be mindful of the harm that pokies do actually cause in our community. I'm not going to move that onto the planning scheme because the data is not there to support it. If there is, then I'll certainly be looking forward in that direction. So I think this policy strikes the right balance between supporting our venue operators in terms of their legitimate businesses, but also to really take a strong stand to minimise the harm of pokies or electronic gaming machines in our municipality. But also, I think we're taking a very strong stance in a leadership position by not supporting pokies applications on council-owned land and not supporting any expansion of new pokies license on pokies owned land, on council-owned land rather. That sends a very strong message to the industry, and we can also now move on to support our residents who are actually impacted through pokies addiction, through financial hardships and counselling and family violence and a host of other social and economic issues that our residents are experiencing as a result of electronic gaming machine addiction. I'll leave it at Mr. Mayor, and Councillor McCarthy might want to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lee. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Lee, for leading in terms of maintaining that position that this council has held, which is to not support electronic gaming machines, but particularly on council-owned land, which is what the previous proposal looked at potentially doing. I think we need to name two things in this situation, though, and one is that we are extremely limited in our power in this space because of the state legislation that governs the consideration of pokies. And we saw that when council took a strong position in relation to both the Gaming and Liquor Authority, and also, of course, in terms of the planning scheme component, or the planning and zoning component. And that, of course, that battle, both battles, in fact, we lost. And we lost because the legislation that supports the distribution of electronic gaming machines, and when I say gaming, I should say gambling machines, because that's what they are, does not work in the favour of either councils or communities, and particularly vulnerable communities. And our own data in relation to the Grandview case showed that within a couple of kilometres of that site there were around 8 mental health services, and there was an Aboriginal women's housing facility just across the road, and supported accommodation directly above where those EGMs ended up being installed. So it's clear from our own track record that we don't have the power. Who does have the power? Well, the respective authorities, and of course the state parliament. And we will continue to call upon them to seriously look at the legislation that governs this scourge on our community, because we know that the amount of money that gets lost in pokies revenue and pokies expenditure is equivalent in some years to council's rate base. Now that's an extraordinary amount of money. It's extraordinary because they're the losses. And if you think about the amount of money that is lost, and you think about the amount of work that you're able to achieve through council's rates and council's budget each year, it is incredible to think what a difference we could actually see in our community if we didn't see those losses. And the losses are there because of the accessibility. So I support this policy. I think it is the right step forward, but we must continue to advocate to the level of government that actually does control this. And if we don't, then we're actually failing our community.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'll speak in favour of this, but I must say I'm speaking in favour of this quite in a very reluctant manner, is that whilst I agree that we need a policy, and I acknowledge that there are strong limits on councils in terms of what powers it has over poker machines in our city, but I believe that this policy does not go far enough, and I think that we could have been a little bit stronger in what we said in the policy, notwithstanding the statutory limitations that we have of what we can impose in regards to gaming machines. I think that we could have included in the policy things like listing the the venues and on an annual basis, and how much they lose, both in our Darebin news, but also annually doing that in the local papers. And I think that would send out that message to the community about what the actual damage of pokies are in our city. And I think that our policy that does not actually draw that out. The other thing that we could have said in this policy is that we could have demanded from the federal government, from the state government, that a percentage of the losses in the city of Darebin, and that the city of Darebin has one of the highest recorded losses as a result of gaming machines, that a certain percentage of those losses actually came back to our city in order to fund programs against problem gambling, and also to provide alternatives to gambling in our city, which are much needed as a way of diverting people away from those gaming venues. Well, look, having said that, I think in terms of the policy, I think it's a good start. And there are some open questions there in the policy, and I think the key of this policy is really advocacy, and I really think that we should try and advocate on those two particular points that I've just raised.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Walsh.
I'm going to speak against. I'm speaking against this, and Councillor Greco mentioned things that the report didn't do, and which is name and effectively name and shame venues. I'm glad the report didn't do that. I think that would be, and I'm glad that the policy doesn't do that, because I think that's not the way that we should be going with our venues, and making pokies venues out as necessarily be always. We shouldn't necessarily be demonising them. Look, I'm uncomfortable with this, not because I don't see that problem gambling does harm. It does, but I think this is kind of the words of the here could be seen as somewhat punitive. So I'm going to vote against.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Does the mover wish to close the debate?
Just very briefly, I think we are right in the heart of the gambling industry here in the city of Darebin. As we don't need to be repeated many times, we lose $68 million a year. $68 million. That's $68 million not spent on cafes and hairdressers and restaurants and all the other thriving small businesses that will need money from our residents. Instead, that goes to big corporations. If we're here to support small business, we have to support this EMT policy.
Thank you, Councillor Lee, and I will mention one comment. I think you struck the word balance in your argument previously was probably what highlights the fact that we need it as it is. Okay, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? That item's carried.
Can I call for division, please?
Division called by Councillor Lee. All those in favour of the recommendation, please stand. I name Councillor Lee, McCarthy, Williams, Cetus, Fontana, Lawrence, Greco, Valella. Those against, please stand. I name Councillor Walsh. Thank you. Next item of consideration is our 6.8, the Darebin Social Affordable Housing Program on Council.
Second, Mr. Mayor.
I was going to move. Project, one at a time. Councillor Lawrence was the mover. Seconded. I'll give to Valella. You can all speak to it. So, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, councillors will be familiar with this subject matter. It's been going on for some time. Obviously, those councillors who served on the previous council, 2008 to 2012, will also recognise the themes in this. It is built on our housing policy, and here is a special pilot program similar to what's been undertaken in Port Phillip and to a limited extent in some other cities, in terms of utilising council car park, council land to actually leverage and attract social housing and low income housing into the city. Now, just in terms of background, We've been doing some work on this for some time, since 2009, I think, and looking at the actual needs in the area in terms of addressing the 500 plus homeless people in the area, the 7,000 plus in the greater region of the northern suburbs in terms of the public housing waiting list. And our policy basically outlines that a great deal of need can be addressed if just 110 social housing or public housing units are built each year. Sadly, we've gone into a decline since the end of the RUD programs of funding, over $1.2 billion worth of public housing and social housing in Victoria during the stimulus period, and there hasn't been federal or state funding. So we've in fact seen 500 public housing units removed from this city in the last several years. Now, what that means for our city's diversity and equity is quite dramatic, because as the price of private housing goes up and as we increase our housing stock through new developments, we're actually targeting people on high incomes to those developments. So as a percentage, the actual amount of housing in the area is actually less than 4% is what we could classify as social housing or public housing. So as a percentage, we're losing. In terms of private housing, I must note this is in our social housing policy. We have a current deficit of housing of only 8 housing units a year. So fundamentally, we have rezoned enough land that the private sector is replacing housing as demand and meeting demand. That's virtually balanced. So it's very important, these programs. It's 3 blocks of land. It may only be, 20 or 30 units done on each block. We don't know. And there may actually be private and public mixes in this program, because fundamentally what we're doing is going to the state government and going to some of the providers we've noted in here and saying, here is 3 excellent sites that the council will support.
10 seconds.
And inviting in those expressions of interest. So it's something we really need to get onto.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Bryler.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I think the right to affordable housing is a fundamental human right. And the fact that we have a very high rate of homeless, I don't know what the figure is nationwide, but I think in the state of Victoria, any one night there's about 500. Is it 500 people or 800 people?
In the city.
Sorry, in the city of Darwin alone. It's a national disgrace, Mr Mayor, and I think the fact that it should be part of the national conversation, but it's not, and the fact that there's no federal or state money into public housing or affordable housing is really a disgrace. So I'm really pleased, like a lot of us are, I'm sure, that something is happening, that we are committing as a council to using council land in a creative sort of a model to make some contribution towards providing access to affordable housing. I think it's an exciting project, but we know, Mr Mayor, that the demand is just so great that we can't do it on our own, that we really do need leadership from federal government and the state government to recognise what I would say is a national emergency. And we know that, and what is really troubling as well, Mr Mayor, is that we know that not investing in public housing is actually very short-sighted, because homelessness and such ills actually affects people's health, and down the track, and they don't become or are disadvantaged to the extent that it ends up costing the state more. So the whole economic reasoning behind it is I think, flawed. But at least Darebin Council is contributing in some way. I think it's our obligation to take care of the welfare of all citizens, and this is one part of it. And I'm really excited. And thank you to officers.
Thank you very much, Councillor Villella. Councillor Grego.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'd like to say a few words in relation to this motion. It's been a long-standing issue for this council, that in relation to addressing the housing stress in our city, and I'm really glad that now we're getting closer to the, if you like, to the pointy end of actually trying to deliver some social and affordable housing in our city. In the past, we've been very strong advocates for social and affordable housing, but we've known that our advocacy has just fallen on deaf ears. And instead, this course of action that we're taking now is actually putting council in a position where council can make a contribution of itself in relation to increasing the stock of social and affordable housing. And I think I think it's a wise direction on the part of the council of identifying idle land of where we can actually place some affordable housing and social housing together with other partners, of course. I think it's also very, very important because, as we've noticed, that homelessness is a growing problem in our society. And actually, just recently, the Royal Commission on Family Violence actually identified that lack of housing is a particular issue for residents or for people here in Victoria. And so we really need to increase the stock of social affordable housing in order to alleviate, as the Royal Commissioner said, some of the issues associated with family violence. The other thing that's important about increasing the stock of social and affordable housing is that what's being noticed more and more so is that many older women are falling into homelessness, and that therefore social and affordable housing becomes important to actually provide for them. So I'm glad that Council's moving in that direction. We're putting our money where our mouth is. Enough with advocacy. Let's try to create some bricks and mortar in terms of housing homelessness in our city.
Speakers, Councillor Walsh, I beg your pardon.
I was actually going to propose to defer this matter. If that's possible.
Too late.
Okay.
Speaking for or against?
In that case, I'm in the awkward position and the unfortunate position of speaking against. And it is an awkward and unfortunate position to be speaking against this, because I see and I understand the need for more affordable housing in our city. And the rate of homelessness in Melbourne is astounding, and I'm confronted by it just like everyone else is. But my issue is that we haven't, because to me there's one group we haven't really consulted in, and it's local residents who are who are living in surrounding areas to these proposed sites. I've spoken to countless residents who live adjacent to Northwood Plaza who have heard about this proposal and are anxious and anxious about proposals for new development around them, and so I'm speaking against this because not because I'm not standing up for social housing, but because I'm kind of standing up for greater consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Other speakers before Councillor Lawrence will close the debates, and we'll let someone speak against. Councillor Williams first.
I'm speaking for. I just wanted to say thank you to my fellow councillors that attended the workshop and coming to the 3 sites for this mixed pilot project. I just want to also highlight that it's not actually just for homeless people. It is for disability, homeless, elder women, women and children, new arrivals and refugees, Centrelink income people, and those who are partially on Centrelink and that are engaged in the workplace also.
Thank you, Councillor Lynch. I'm actually glad you mentioned those who attended the workshop, and Councillor Walsh, you were there. I think there was general consensus, as is written on page 50, that these sites were in the mix. So, yeah. Any further comments?
I think it's worth, just because of some of the comments that have been made, Mr Mayor, actually providing some comfort and reassurance to Councillor Walsh and anyone else who is concerned that there won't be consultation. In fact, that's what this report is all about, because what this report sets out is in fact a high-level consideration of the approach that Council needs to take if it's going to be taken seriously in relation to this proposal. And all council has done in relation to this report so far, assuming it is adopted, is identify 3 sites that warrant serious further investigation. And the reason why it does that is so that we can then go that next step and engage with the state government and say, we would be very interested in having a conversation with you, partnering with you around these 3 sites, and of course talking to those housing organisations that council is already engaged with. And of course, and I draw Councillor Walsh's attention to page 51, which sets out from a risk management perspective where a project like this could go off the rails. And it says very clearly, one of the risks in this situation is that you find opposition from surrounding residents, exactly the people that Councillor Walsh referred to just a moment ago. Well, I can provide some comfort to Councillor Walsh because I've also spoken with many residents, particularly in the Northcote area, who are deeply concerned about the housing crisis that exists, deeply concerned about people being pushed to the margins, being pushed out of our area. They are their own neighbours, in fact, who would love to stay living in the area and simply can't find affordable accommodation that is appropriate and inclusive. And I know people that would love to see this sort of a project in their own backyard, on their own doorstep, just around the corner from them, and in the case of Northcote Plaza, close to the amenities and facilities that people need in order to have a thriving lifestyle. So I think it's a sign of courage of this council that we are even considering this seriously. Yep. I think it is exactly what our community has called for over many years, and I will draw your attention, Mr Mayor, to the launch that we did together in 2010 of the Housing Stress Action Plan with the residents in Holmes Street, some of the most disengaged and disadvantaged people in the state, and who live in constant fear and threat of losing their housing. This is for them, and it's for people like
Councillor McCarthy. Any other speakers? Councillor Steeles.
Just on a point, I can oppose to the mover and the secondary amendment, because I think one aspect that has been missing and probably offers a lot more viability is the incorporation of the Little Hawthorne Lane car park, which we own.
No, they didn't make the cut, unfortunately, in the initial workshops.
Street, is that?
Yeah, well, it runs parallel.
It didn't make the cut. Didn't make the cut.
It wasn't.
No, it didn't make the cut.
Can I ask a question as to why?
Because we had a workshop several months ago and briefing sessions which didn't meet the criteria. It didn't meet the criteria on assessing it as a suitable site. It was brought up at the workshop, I recall it.
I mean, given the site size, because we've just to refresh Councillor's memory through your indulgence, Mr Mayor, we've actually nominated this as a place for private development and intensification.
Yeah.
So I find it a bit weird that we've knocked back in relation to this.
Yeah. Does the mover wish to close the debate?
I'll just close the debate. Sorry, I don't have the information Councillor Cetus was seeking. I would thank Councillor Williams for bringing Council's attention back to who are the target recipients if we can successfully get several hundred units built across these 3 sites. They are people with disabilities. These are people being locked into poverty and low income, which we as a society are going to address with NDIS. Housing is still an issue. Homeless, as I said, in our own housing study identifies that 500 people are homeless. You may not recognise them in the street. You may see someone emerge from a car at 6 a.m. and not realise they've been there all night. These are things in the city. And have also, in abandoned buildings. Older women, as mentioned by Councillor Greco, and the recent report on Royal Commission report on domestic violence. Women and children, again, as mentioned by the state government's report, and subject to $150 million worth of housing blitz funding. And of course, new arrivals and refugees. I have taken 3 phone calls on people concerned about refugees living in Northcote car park. I did allocate an hour and a half to talk to them about how refugees are not excluded from the social and public housing programs of the state government, that we are seeking to attract funds to build these things. I did explain to them how other people and groups in the community will be benefiting from these social programs. I note they aren't here with placards. I note they're not. I note that Bendigo, the threat of Bendigo people come down here is not here.
10 seconds.
Because they understand we are failing those on Centrelink incomes and those on part-time workforce with some supplementary. We're
Thanks,
unveiling
Councillor
them in
Lawrence. A
terms of-
lot of new stuff introduced there as well. Thank you very much. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? That item is carried.
Call for a division.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I call those in favour of the recommendation as seen, please. I name Councillor Lee, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Williams, Councillor Seeders, Councillor Montana, Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Villella and Councillor Greco. Those against, please stand. I name Councillor Walsh. Thank you, councillors. Next item is our 6.9, the draft Bill Laurie Over and Aldous Gardens Master Plan. Happy to move. Moved, Councillor McCarthy, seconded. Councillor Lee. Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'll keep it brief. This essentially is a report to bring forward the proposed master plan for further community consultation. There has been a couple of workshops held late last year with local residents and the sports clubs that have a really strong ownership and strong connection to the land there, not just because of its recreational purposes, but also because of its great heritage value as well. And as councillors might be aware, Aldous Gardens is one of our oldest historical parks and has been a place that people have been gathering on socially for well over 100 years now in terms of the European experience, but going back into the Indigenous experience was a place of gathering for thousands of years. So we need to recognise that there is a whole range of connections that people have to this place, and of course we want to see this place continue and this particular open space, which encompasses a mixture of both passive and active recreation, to continue to be something which the community loves and that the community feels is cared for by council. And that's really what this master plan proposes to do, is to work out how we can ensure the retention of all the great things we have there and add a few things here and there which the community would like to see occur. I'll just draw council's attention to the fact that we have had a couple of consultation workshops. There's been some strong community interest here, and of course we want to see what other people think as well in terms of the proposed master plan, which will come back for council's adoption and into the budget cycle if it's adopted this evening. The key points, and they're listed there on page 56 and 57, are really simple things. They're about improving some of the amenities at the park. Obviously the things like the play space, the barbecue, the picnic facilities, the simple things which actually modernise parts of the park which have been allowed to sort of be run down a little bit over the years because of the age of the park. But some really important things which are easily missed, except you realise that they're not there when things go wrong, things like the irrigation system. So ensuring that the lawns and the grass and of course also the trees and plants are watered, because we are looking at potential drought conditions over coming years, and we want to make sure that the natural vegetation that we have there continues to thrive. Of course the pavilion there, the Bill Laurie Oval Pavilion, of course is part of the Council's Sports Infrastructure Program, and it is a well-loved facility and has provided a lot of enjoyment for both professional and semi-professional and local teams to play at as well. And I just want to make one note, and I did mention it in the council chamber some weeks ago, is that this was also the location where Pastor Sir Doug Nichols actually lived as the caretaker of Northcote Oval. And it would be great to see incorporated into any redevelopment some recognition or greater recognition of his role at that site, because of the history that he and his family have had, of course, with this area, and of course the big role that played in terms of the Aboriginal community. So I would like to propose that be given some further consideration.
I'm sure we'll get some feedback now that's been noted. Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lee, your second.
Nothing to add, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Walsh.
I will also like to speak in favour, and could I first of all congratulate the officers on doing this. And this is a park which has a lot of community concern, and it's an area which I speak to residents about frequently. So I'm glad that council is bringing forward the master plan, because it's it's something I've previously advocated for. So I'm glad to and I put up a motion last year about it actually. So I'm glad that we're doing it.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. If there's no further comments, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item is carried. Thank you, councillors. Next item is our 6.10, the confidentiality policy, handling of confidential information by councillors. Move Councillor Williams, second Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, just council's just adopting the confidential policy, and also that council adopt the procedure for handling the confidential information by councillors attached as Appendix B. Councillor note that there was training in relation to confidentiality, which was provided to councillors on the 11th and I think 13th of April this year, and that the Mayor write to the local government investigators to say that we have now compliance and we have done all that, and advising that the confidential training has actually been completed, and that to provide copies of the adopted policy and procedures.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor McCarthy, you need to add?
I think it's worth noting that there have been changes to the Local Government Act, particularly the penalties in relation to councillors disclosing information in relation that it is deemed confidential, and there has been reclassification as to how that's considered by the Act, and some clarity, I think, for both councillors and also for officers, and of course also the government and relevant authorities. I think just at a very simple level, if it's confidential, it's confidential, and the principle still applies. I think the clarity here is that council's documents are now tighter and clearer and consistent with the Act. And of course, I'd like to think that the spirit of what this is about is actually about recognising that when something is declared confidential by council resolution or decision by the CEO in some cases, that's respected. And that's all this is really reaffirming.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. If there's no further comment, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Next item is a 6.11, instrument of appointment and authorisation to appoint authorised officers to enforce the Planning and Environment Act 87. Move Councillor Lee, second Councillor Villala. Councillor Lee.
It's a routine delegation of authority. As we employ staff or as staff move on to various roles, they need the appropriate level of delegation of authority from the council, and this instrument seeks just to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Nothing further to add?
Nothing further to add, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, councillors. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item is carried. Next item is 8.12, the DECL board nomination. We have a vacancy there for someone to be considered.
I'm happy to second it if that's appropriate, Mr Mayor.
But who are we nominating? Who are we nominating?
I'm going to nominate, okay.
Yeah.
I was going to propose that we defer this till next meeting, given there are quite a few serious things on the confidential agenda, and then the next board meeting for DECL isn't for another 2 months. So,
Mr Mayor, if the motion is to be moved tonight, it needs to be moved with a name.
Yeah, that's the
with
idea.
a recommended name.
Yeah.
It can't be moved without.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I understand that Councillor Williams wanted to be first moving the item, but hasn't given me a name yet. Is anyone interested in nominating for this position?
I'm happy to take a look at it.
Councillor Walsh, you want to have a crack at it? And Councillor McCarthy?
Well, I'm happy to take up the role, but it's up to the mover to
Yeah,
put a name in it.
you're the mover, Councillor Williams, so do you want to put a name to it?
Do you
Can I
want to
suggest-
talk about it, or?
Can I just, as a seconder, I'll be happy to second it if Councillor McCarthy is nominated, because I understand Councillor Walsh has already been on the board once before, so I think it's
In this
appropriate.
term?
Yeah, so I think it's appropriate. I'm happy to second it if Councillor McCarthy is
So,
nominated.
Councillor Williams, are you moving with
Yes,
Councillor
happy
McCarthy
with
as
that.
the preferred person? Yes?
Yes.
And second
And happy to
Councillor...
second it, yes, with Councillor McCarthy,
Okay,
yes.
thank you. Councillor Williams, if you wish to add or speak to it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, this report is has come to council because my fellow councillor Angela Vavalla has actually resigned from the board of Darebin Enterprise Centre, which is now trading as Melbourne Innovation Centre. This report actually has come to us so we can seek to appoint another councillor, which has now vacated the board. Just a little quick history that the DECL, which is now known as the Melbourne Innovation Centre, is a business incubator located in Melbourne's north, and it's a facility that actually has over 300 businesses, creating over 1,300 jobs for the Victorian economy for over the last 18 years. So it's an important board, and it's always welcome. We always have two councillors and an officer that actually attends the meeting, which occurs, I think, every second month. And so I welcome Councillor Trent McCarthy.
Just very quickly, Mr. Mayor, it's with sadness that I had to resign from the board, but in order to avoid any potential conflict of interest due to my own business endeavours, it was the best thing for me to do. But I am encouraged and delighted that Councillor McCarthy has been nominated. I think, as Councillor Williams said, it's a really important board. The organisation does some great stuff to promote, support business in activity in Darebin, and I think Councillor McCarthy will be a really invaluable contributor to the board. He will be able to share his knowledge with business, for encouraging business, and what he does in his private capacity. And I think he's a creative human being and a great problem solver. And I think, I think it's a great recommendation. So I congratulate Mr. McCarthy and Councillor McCarthy, and I think you do a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other speakers, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Carried. That concludes that item. Okay, we now go on to item 7, consideration of responsive notices of motion in general business. I see we have none there, Mr. CEO, which now goes to item 8, on notices of motion. We have one there, 8.1, seeking more funds for successful export jobs program, moved by Councillor Lawrence. Seconded Councillor Lee. Councillor Lawrence. So your motion.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. This notice of motion is based on recent reporting we've had of a previous program of council that where council invested $30,000 looking at promoting export activity by firms in Darebin. And there's a great variety of firms in Darebin involved in everything from engineering through to fashion to production of foods, and obviously also education, which are export businesses. So it did strike me that that our allocation of a mere $30,000 in this area, which addresses many of the businesses that aren't retail businesses, but businesses that are occupying our industrial strips above the shops along Plenty Road, etc., resulted in the creation of 19 export-related jobs in the private sector. And this compares to the current state government's jobs program of an efficiency of a factor 4 to 1, that is, 4 times cheaper. So I did look at the numbers of this, and perhaps it's because our economic development team work in detail with niche employers to identify where the support is needed and help them grow. There is, of course, a very large food sector in this area. It employs over 7,000 people in Whittlesea, Hume and principally Moreland and Darebin, but it's made up of 300 fairly small firms. So they don't always have the export expertise, networking, etc. that they need, say, of a large Ford Motor Company. So it's very important, along with what we've heard today about Deckel, that we're involved in this kind of area where we're creating export jobs. So I do recommend the motion for people to look at, and also to look at that these significant commercial ratepayers sector that we're helping.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Lee, anything?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence, for bringing this issue to the attention of the council. I know this is something that you've been working on, since the very early days of this council when you were in the mayoralty. So it is no surprise that you want to keep this program going, and it does, as you said, offer good value for money, just purely from an economic perspective. I did work for a couple of years as a rehab consultant with the Commonwealth Rehab Services back in the early 2000s, and I know back then, if you calculate the retrospective data, it costs up to $5,000 to get somebody a job. And if you multiply that by the 19 jobs that created, you're looking at almost $100,000, not including the CPI increases over the last 10 years or so. So this does offer really good value for money for not only our businesses but also for the ratepayers of Darebin, and it does keep the local employment within Darebin, but also more importantly it seeks to export that knowledge and the opportunities overseas to a greater audience. So I wholeheartedly support Councillor Lawrence's motion.
Councillor Lowe.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just very quickly, I want to congratulate Councillor Lawrence for initiating this, and also the work from our economic development team, because when I was reading the report, I was just really impressed. It was just so dense with action. And it was very broad, and it was broad in its scope in that it was ambitious, but at the same time it was very directed, very targeted, and there was always, it was just a well executed, I think, pilot project. And I'm glad to see point 3, that we write to the State Treasurer and Finance Minister seeking government funds to promote, to match how much council is invested. And I think, I would like to see a whole kind of comms focus on this too. I think there's a lot of talk about innovation and investment and growth and jobs at the moment, both on the federal and the state, and investing a lot of time. And here's a project that really operated on a relatively or comparably shoestring budget. And achieved some really positive pretty positive gains, impressive gains, I would say, in a relatively short period of time. And I think it's important to really promote that, what we've achieved here at council, like our solar energy, savings. This is working for us. We've got a good model there, and I think we should really look at how can we promote this, and how can we draw more funds, let's say, to the project. I'm sure that there is a federal ear out there that might be interested, but I think this is the buzzword now around the traps. Innovation, investment, export, food industry. This can go a long way, and I think and I think we should seriously consider investing time and energy for maybe a long-term strategy around that. I think it's got huge potential. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bilala. Councillor McCarthy.
Just wondering if it's possible to add, to propose to the mover a couple of extra words to one of the points at this stage of the debate.
What is it?
Yes. The words would be simply to the point 1, a comma with a particular focus on women in business and Indigenous-led businesses.
Yes. Happy to take that, and even renewable energy.
I was not going to overreact there. Yeah. And I would just, if I can just speak to that, thank you to the mover and seconder for accepting that. I had the pleasure, along with yourself, Mr Mayor, and Councillor Williams, at attending the Women in Business event that was held on Friday at Melbourne Polytechnic, and I have to say it was probably the best business-related event that I've been to in all my time involved in council, both before I was a councillor and also since I've been a councillor, because what struck me was the optimism of all the people there, and I'd say probably in terms of the audience it was about 98% women, and almost everyone either was running a business, was starting one up, had aspirations to, was wanting to either find a mentor or mentor someone else. But what was clear was that the businesses that the women who were there were running or wanting to start up were not just in the local context, but also in the international context. And we had women who ran design firms, where they were doing design work that was being picked up overseas, where instead of jobs being exported, the work was being exported overseas. So it's not just goods being exported, but it's also services. And I think we need to keep in mind that as Darebin moves continuously towards a service-based economy, we are losing manufacturing jobs, but we are gaining jobs in other industries. Food and fibre is one, renewables is another, unique Indigenous services. We have some of those businesses that are located in here that were incubated through DECL, and of course businesses that women have started. So I really thank councillors for taking that on board, because I think it's a key plank of our economic strategy to lift up people into those next spaces of that export process.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. And I will also mention a couple of words. There was some incredible talent in that room last Friday, a magnificent event. I think we need to thank the staff involved in Mr CEO for Economic Development for organising that. Those who were there would have certainly got a lot out of it. Okay, there's no further debate. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item is carried. Thank you, councillors. There's no more notice of motion.
We note that was unanimous.
Unanimously noted there, Alderman Taker. Over to item 9, urgent business. Mr. CEO.
Mr. Mayor, just your indulgence, there are 3 urgent businesses today accepted into the agenda. The first one is from Councillor Lawrence, to advise this motion on Brooklyn Primary School in relation to the state government budget.
Okay.
Shortly.
That item's been circulated to councillors. It's on our tables here.
I can mention the other two as well.
Yes, please.
Proceed.
I haven't.
Mr. Mayor, I did not see it.
I beg your pardon. It'll be circulated now, I think. The 9.1. Here we go. Apologies.
9.2 will be in that order. A confidential motion again put forward by Councillor Lawrence, which relates to Councillor Turner, which will be confidential. Third item would be, I accepted a report from Council Executive Manager for Governance, among other things, to the Council to respond to the inspectorate shortly. Those are 3 items. And just add to that, third item, I would be declaring conflict.
Okay, thank you very much. So the 3 items that are urgently being considered this evening, councillors. The first one, which has now been circulated, an urgent business, urgent item, which we need to vote to include in tonight's agenda. So we have someone
Happy to move.
happy to move. Councillor Williams, seconded. Councillor Lee, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour to accept that?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Yes,
Oh,
councillor.
sorry, what was that we voted on, whether we've got...
To accept it
To put
as an
this
urgent
in the
item.
agenda.
We're not voting on it yet.
I've got a question as to why is it urgent? And secondly, how does this stand with a notice of motion that went through in the chamber? I think it was maybe 2 council meetings ago, where it was in relation to this particular site, and it was in relation to the transferring of land, because it seems to me that there's, well...
I think it's similar. Councillor Villala. I think in light of
I don't see why this is urgent, and we haven't discussed this. And I'm sorry. I mean, I don't have a problem with it, but I can't support it, and I don't see why it's urgent.
Well, what we're voting is to actually accept it as an urgent item. We'll put that to a vote. Then you can argue against it if you choose to do so. Okay. All right. So we're going to consider this item to be included as an urgent business item. Okay. We've had a mover and a seconder. Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
So is this just the first item that Councillor Lawrence has proposed?
That's the one we're voting on. Then we'll go through each one individually. Yes. So to vote to accept this as an urgent business item. All those in favour?
Of which one, sorry?
The first one.
9.1.
9.1. The item that's just been circulated. 9.2 is at the back. So we're doing 9.1.
We don't have a back, so we're just doing the one.
Beg your pardon. Okay.
Makes it easier.
It's in relation to the Ruthven Primary School site. We're going to vote to accept it as an urgent item before we actually consider it. So I'll put that to a vote.
So Mr. Mayor, before you do, I just picked up on what Councillor, sorry, I'll stand up, on what Councillor has said. Could we have some rationale about why this is an urgent item?
Councillor Lawrence?
This is the one about the MOU, sorry. Yeah. Just for some background information.
Mr. Mayor, I have submitted this motion in a couple of formats, been bouncing around. I have submitted a rationale. I'm happy to speak to it. Obviously, I don't
Just
want
explain the rationale at this stage
The rationale
before
at
we
this
can accept
stage
it.
is that the state government budget's been brought forward. There is a program for $150 million worth of housing to address women's housing needs, and at this point it is important, I think, for us to say they actually have their own land that they can look at and actually create some housing solutions there in Reservoir. So obviously, yeah.
I think that's a winner this time.
So
Okay,
the timeline of the state budget.
Okay, so there's a bit of rationale there, so I'll put that to a vote to accept this as an urgent business item. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. So we'll accept that as an urgent item. Okay. Next one that we're going to consider is
Confidential item.
2, a confidential councillor behaviour matter to be heard in camera.
Should that be, just a procedural issue, would that be better off dealt with the confidential part of the agenda, or do we have to close the meeting and reopen it, then close it again, reopen it again?
What's going to be considered then?
Through you, Mr Mayor, so these are just to accept them in the agenda so
Certainly.
they can be considered.
Yes.
It will be then considered
In the confidential part.
section.
Understood, thank you.
Okay, so we're just moving to accept this matter being considered.
Happy
All
to
that, move Councillor Lee, second Councillor Williams. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, so that's been accepted. And the third item is we need Council to move a confidential report in response to the local government inspectorate to be heard in
I'll
camera.
move that.
Move Councillor Lawrence, second Councillor Walsh. All those in favour? That's carried, that's been accepted. Okay, so we've included all those in tonight's agenda. We'll now deal with the first item, which was circulated, 9.1, the urgent business item, in relation to Ruthven Primary School. We'll move it for that.
Yes, Mr Mayor. Look, I've submitted
Councillor
this...
Lawrence has moved, second Councillor...
No. I'm not.
Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Williams. Councillor Lawrence, yeah, 3 minutes.
I've moved this motion in response to reading the details in terms of the challenge outlined into the report into domestic violence in Victoria, and the huge challenge to provide safe housing options to actually allow the objectives of the safe exiting or safe housing options for people who are victims of domestic violence. Now, what the report obviously underscores is what we discussed earlier, that the housing stock and the housing availability for people generally is missing. Now, in relation to Ruthven Primary, we've had a standoff with the Education Department, understanding that there's a subdivision of 33 residential blocks sitting underneath the zoning of that former primary school. That former primary school was created by consolidating 33 residential blocks. And from that, they've come to some kind of calculation. We've been trying to talk the council into spending up to $14 million to secure some of that site, or all of that site, for public housing, for public park. Of course, the site had been previously used, half a public park, in conjunction with the school, and the community had been enjoying more than half of the site. This motion seeks to try to kick-start this discussion about this public land and ask the fundamental question: why should council pay again for land that we already renovated and made public open space? And number two, in our open space strategy, it only requires a 15,000 square metre area there. That's actually a 25,000 square metre park. So there is a potential for a large section, up to 11 blocks, which are 800 square metres each, so potentially 40 housing units, to be created to help the women's housing blitz. And why don't we ask the question about value for money for Victorian taxpayers, that the Education Department should be transferring that land to the Ministry of Housing and expediting the construction of housing there. And obviously the council would need to be involved in terms of planning of this. This I have discussed with people, senior people in planning 3 years ago, this kind of scenario. We now have a state government making a commitment to creating a significant amount of social housing, and people in Yarra are putting forward the east-west houses. We should put forward this land in reservoir and be part of the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Second, Councillor Williams, do you wish to add to?
Just saying that, look, it is a very large site, which is public land, and really this is a no-brainer, that finally the government is actually putting money towards domestic violence, and the biggest issue that women, children and that face when it comes to violence in the family is that they have nowhere to go. This would be a wonderful initiative that if we could come to the party, and obviously with funding there, that maybe we can come to some wonderful future for those who are in need, desperate need, to get out of the circumstances that they can't see any way out.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor McCarthy.
I just have a question actually, because I've only just seen this this evening, and while I support the merits of it, I'm just wondering if it does go far enough. I note in point 2, I just ask if Councillor Lawrence is the mover and Councillor Williams is the seconder, would be happy to add the local members included in point 2. Because
Oh yes, of course.
it's just think we're missing some key
I
voices
would
here.
say local and adjoining because it
Yeah.
is-
So if it could include the Mayor Wright to the Ministers of Planning, Housing, Finance, Status of Women, and all local members, and if that's supported, I'm happy to speak just in favour of it.
It has been.
I actually think this is quite an opportunistic move and a good one, because the test has been put forward by the government, which is, are there partners on the ground that are willing to come forward with innovative approaches in terms of finding places to create the housing that has already been spoken about. And here we have a piece of land which otherwise is at very serious risk of being sold purely for profit by the state government for a housing development that will not accommodate necessarily anyone who desperately needs to find housing south of Barney's Road. And in this case, here we have an opportunity to provide housing for people who are in really dire straits, but also to create a green space there which will be well loved by the community. And I think that's a very nice mix that's been proposed by Councillor Lawrence. It would have been good to see this come to us in a full report, but I get the point about the opportunity and the challenge that Councillor Lawrence is throwing down to the state government to say, if you're serious about this, then please come and work with us on this site, because we want to see that sort of housing provided in our city, and not just in the places that where it usually might otherwise be. So I take the point about opportunity, and that's why I'm prepared to support the push this evening.
Councillor Bellotta.
Mr. Mayor, I think of course I support the need for extra investment in and commitment to housing for women. I think the issue I had is that this is the first time I saw it, saw this, and it's in the ward, and I think a courtesy conversation from
It's an urgent item, so something.
No, but I think it's important, Mr. Mayor, because we have got another issue, another letter, the Mayor, a notice of motion that came to council, but in regards to the land swap and the former Ruthven Primary School, but I don't think that the two are mutually exclusive. I think, of course, I'll support it. I do think there's a commitment here to some parkland. Is it 66% of the site will still be parkland? But I would like to see, so that we don't look like we're kind of going in different directions as a council, for there to be some incorporation of the previous notice of motion to say we still think it should be public land. It's obviously not going to go down this path. So this is this is our next position, because otherwise we've got two letters going from the mayor to the finance minister about one particular site and two different wishes of council. I don't think that's a good look. I think we need to, and this is where I think a bit of groundwork and some conversation beforehand would have been appreciated, so that when we do write to the minister, it's united. Because and I think I would appreciate if somehow, and I rely on your judgment, Mr. Mayor, in working with the officers, how we can marry the two, because otherwise I think it's
Okay.
not a
Thanks,
good look.
Councillor. I think the other letter's already gone.
Has it already gone?
Yeah, I think it has.
Well, there might have to be some well, I don't know how you manage that, but we're going to need to be quite delicate. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Everything's delicate, Councillor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Any further discussion from Council before you close?
I do.
Mr. Mayor, I have.
Yeah.
I think it
Councillor
was
Lee
Councillor
first.
Lee.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of questions and also amendment. Can we just get some officer input whether that 33 blocks make up the 32%? It seems a very neat.
34%. I think get 100% there.
I just want to get some officer
I haven't
input.
got
on
the
that.
motion in front of me. There's 33 blocks.
This came as a, just to give the history of it, it came as a urgent business. Eventually, they came back with a rationale, it should go to the budget. That's what I'm taking somebody who has done this work, has taken some due diligence about where the 66 and 34% come from.
So that is, to put it plainly, that's an arbitrary figure.
I just need to check with the officers. Yeah.
It's a very precise figure.
Yeah.
Point of order. Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
I haven't heard officers to point out where that 33% came from yet.
Can we provide an answer, Mr. Dev, at this stage? Yeah.
If I can. This came from all the reports you've received in 2013 on this very subject. Now, the blocks we had to look at...
Just point of order, Mr. Mayor. I still haven't heard from officers where that 33% came from yet.
Well, we actually can't...
There was reference made to 2012. My memory doesn't stretch back to 2012. Sometimes doesn't stretch back to yesterday. So that's just fault on my part. Maybe just
I don't think we'll take that question on notice. We haven't voted on it yet, but I think we need to probably have a think about that one. Councillor Greco, you've got a...
I also got an amendment, Mr. Mayor, because I agree with the spirit of the motion, notwithstanding the fact that I question the 33% figure.
All right, so we've had one from Councillor McCarthy already. So, Councillor Bowe, do you propose something else?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With leave of the proposer and the seconder, I'd like to add the following words. So, transfer from the Department of Education to the Department of Health and Human Services, because it's transfer from, but we don't know who the transferring land to. I think that's an error which must not overlook.
Yeah. Ownership of the site.
It should be Department of Housing.
Well, there is no such thing as Department of Housing. It's within part of Human Health and Human Services.
Transfer of Human Services.
Department of Health and Human Services. Is the right, correct department title now?
To. All right. Is the move okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay. Okay. Right. Next question, Councillor.
No, I've got a proposed amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Another one.
Just to pick up on Councillor Villa's point about there are a few things in the mix here. You know, there's the Preston Secondary College site, of which council owns some land, and there's also these sites, the letters that have gone through. So what I propose that after the word Reuben Primary School and Preston College site should be resolved by an MOU. So what it does, it puts in the package all of these sites and tries to discuss with the state government, all these questions that are still open in relation to future ownership of these particular
sites.
sites.
So Preston Girls Second College site, yes, include any?
Yep.
Yep.
So if that's acceptable to the mover and the seconder.
Mover?
Yeah, happy.
Yeah, that's been accepted.
Just
Okay.
a point of clarification, please, Mr. Mayor. Is the intention of that to swap 30% of Preston Girls Secondary College as housing? Because that's what is being read at the moment.
It could be ambiguous.
But what my intent, if I may state it, the intent here is that given that the state government has received notification from us about the Preston secondary site and about the land swap, the possible land swap with her, is that now I think we have to put all those things in the mix and try to have a conversation with the state government and arrive hopefully at an MOU that can both satisfy all those particular situations. That's the intent of the motion, not necessarily...
Just a point of order, Mr. Mayor. I believe the amendment might be contradictory to the intent of the original motion.
Look, Mr. Mayor, I understand the grammatical error of inserting that because, in fact, what they're talking about is the issue of partial land ownings by the council on another site. So, in reflection, maybe we'd best put this either it falls or whatever.
Look, if
Propose an alternative amendment which might pick up on the issue that Councillor Greco has raised and resolve, which would simply be that at the end of point 1, the proposed MOU should also encompass an arrangement regarding the Preston Girls Secondary College becoming a high school for Preston.
Yeah.
that separates it.
Yeah.
Hopefully someone wrote those words
That's a
down.
good one.
You said them.
I'll read it out again.
I was right before you are a problem solver.
Thank you. Simply it would be, in the first point after the dot point, after the full stop would simply be the MOU should also encompass an arrangement for the transition of the former Preston Girls Secondary College to become a high school for Preston.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Might be a separate dot.
Yeah,
Just,
1921.
Put a dot separate.
But where does that, sorry, just a question, where does that leave the whole issue of council owning some of that land?
To be negotiated.
to be negotiated. That's part of the MOU.
Part of the MOU process.
So you have negotiated the front, the beginning of the sentence, did you? Could you read that again, please? Sorry, I'm sorry.
I'll include the words in there. So you've got point 1
Yeah.
at the end of point 1, or it could be point 2, in fact.
We
a new
want it
point
to be
2.
point 2.
Inserted between point 1 and 2. The MOU, or the proposed MOU, should also include negotiations to secure the former Preston Girls Secondary College as a high school for Preston.
As soon as possible.
By 2018. There you go.
As soon as possible.
As soon as possible. As soon as possible.
That's been accepted, okay. All right.
As a separate point, as a point 2.
Point 2.
As soon as possible.
We'll get that.
Happy to take as soon as possible.
As soon as possible.
Okay. I think we've had enough discussion on that, so I think I'll put that to a vote.
As soon as
All those in favour? Councillor Lawrence?
I was going to close the debate.
No, there's no opposition.
no,
No
no,
opposition.
No one's spoken against it.
No opposition, Councillor. I know as much as you like to speak.
Yes.
Somebody has to try to do anything.
Put it to the vote as soon as
I'll
possible,
put it to
Mr
vote.
Mayor.
All those in favour? I'll do it again. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. We'll call that unanimously as well. Okay. That concludes our urgent business. We now go to general business. No general business, Mr CEO. Petitions. Any petitions this evening, councillors? And there are no petitions. Item 12, standing reports of standing committees. We have 12.1.
Just want to add a following point that the council received a briefing on the risks identified by the audit committee in addition to the recommendation.
Okay, okay. Can we do that, Jacinta?
Yeah,
Okay.
just a brief. I've got it, yeah. So it's to, as per the recommendation, to note the audit committee minutes, but also for the council to receive a briefing on the risks identified by the audit committee.
Okay, so point 1 is as listed on page 70. Recommendation. Point 2 to be included as Councillor Lee just read. Risks.
Sorry? Risks. Because in the planning committee there were a number of risks identified as medium, some of identified as medium risk, and I think the councillors ought to be briefed on what those risks are. It may be in private, maybe in confidential, but we need to be briefed.
Can I just get some clarification through you, Mr Mayor? Would that be a briefing by the chair of the audit committee, as per previous practice?
He could probably do that. I think we can invite him to do that, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Happy to second Councillor Lee's
Specific
motion.
list too. Okay, you can explain it. Okay.
Yes.
There's no discussion. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item's carried. That concludes. Move Councillor Lee, second Councillor. Next item is item 13, records of assemblies of councillors. 13.1, move Councillor McCarthy, second Councillor Lee. There's no debate. All those in favour? That's carried. Next item, report by mayors and councillors. I'm assuming all councillors have submitted their reports.
Happy to move.
Move Councillor McCarthy, second Councillor Williams. All those in favour? That item is carried. That concludes that matter. Okay, item 15, consideration of reports considered confidential. We have several items here which we'll be considering in camera because it is a confidential nature, so therefore I have to request the gallery to vacate.
I move that we move into the confidential part of the discussion, Mr Mayor.
Move Councillor Lee to go in the camera, second Councillor Cedars. All those in favour? Carried. I now request the gallery to vacate the chambers. I beg your pardon. Thank you, guys. Yeah, if you can just step outside for a few moments, we'll